5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You're listening to Cosmos Sapiens with the Galaxiscal and Space Ace. We're partnering with the Association of Commercial Space Professionals, or ACSP, to promote their upcoming Space Regulatory Bootcamp, March 4th, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hi, everybody. I am Ubaldo Siminietti, and I'm coming at you today to talk about a really cool event that's coming up at the beginning of March in Albuquerque, New Mexico, called the Space Regulatory Bootcamp. We're doing some interviews with many of the facilitators who are conducting really just some incredible sessions to help new and existing professionals get into the space industry or understand more about, space law, policy, government contracting, how to get into the space industry. So we're really excited to be here. I'm here with my friend in all of this, Inara Tabir. Inara, hello, how are you?
Hey, Ubaldo, good to be here. So excited for today. We've got Daniel Porras with us, and I'm also very excited about the work that ACSP is doing. When I first met them, they were talking about, the fact that law is one of the most siloed industries out there, and it's really hard to navigate. And on top of all the other mountains to climb for the space industry and space communities, they really don't need to have to work through all this regulatory red tape. So they're working to help existing and new entrepreneurs coming in figure out how to navigate all those government systems and all those regulations that are piled up. So it's great work. It's phenomenal work. And I don't see anyone else doing it. So I'm excited to back them.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned Daniel. So Daniel Porras, hello, welcome to the interview. How are you? And tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to be a part of this amazing event.
Sure. I definitely had a long and difficult journey, as you say, up the mountain to get to this event. So my name is Daniel Porras. I'm the corporate counsel and director of international government and regulatory affairs for a company called Rogue Space Systems. I actually I started out in the space law career in what I think is, still kind of the prehistoric days when a lot of folks here in the United States didn't even know that outer space law was a thing. Certainly the guidance counselors at my law school didn't know that it was a thing. But I was very fortunate to get started working in the UN outer space legal system, back in 2006 when I did my first internship for the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and kind of fell into this new generation of young lawyers who were starting to become a part of international negotiations, discussions that were also ramping up at the United Nations level for the first time in like 25 years. The last major UN, treaty was back in 1979, the Moon Agreement, and it's never come into force. So I was very fortunate to become a part of this movement back then at the UN level, and I spent the next almost 15 years working in and out of the UN system, largely at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, where my primary work was on the prevention of an arms race in outer space. So looking at what mechanisms we have at the international level to prevent conflict in space, or at least to minimize the impacts of conflict in space. So I did a lot of my work there at the multilateral level, and then eventually moved on to the Secure World Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization here in the United States that works with world leaders to try and figure out what are the mechanisms, what are the ways that we can ensure that human beings can continue reaping the benefits of outer space for many, many years, with a focus on humans benefiting from space. It's great that we have all these wonderful, ambitious missions, but what's the point if they're not actually benefiting people here on Earth? And eventually, as I was doing a lot of this work on space sustainability and space security in particular, I was contacted by Rogue Space Systems, who wants to build robots for outer space. And the purpose of these bots, if you will, is to clean up junk, conduct satellite servicing, repair satellites instead of just leaving them up there broken, potentially space manufacturing, refueling satellites. a lot of what we consider to be a part of the logistical services for outer space. And it was really great to see that Rogue Space Systems was also aware of the geopolitical implications of the technology they're developing. They very much get that, China will look at the efforts that Rogue is making to, say, clean up debris and say, that could potentially be a space weapon. And what do you need to do in order to develop new technologies that could also be weaponized? Understanding that some of your biggest clients will be military clients to begin with, such as a Space Force, and be able to conduct your civilian commercial operations without, as I tell my colleagues, starting a war. It is one of our fundamental rules at the Rogue Legal Department that, our 3 rules at the Rogue Legal Department are: 1, we will not violate international obligations or do anything that will force our government, the US, to violate its international obligations. Rule number 2, we will not make it harder for anyone else to operate in space. And rule number 3, we don't start wars.
I
I
love
love that.
that.
It's almost a play on Google's "Don't be evil." It's "Don't start space wars."
Yeah,
It's a great
Yes.
foundation to
seriously.
have.
Yeah. And we're not saying that we're not going to work with military actors. If Space Force comes to us and says, we need you to refuel a satellite, that is something that our company is more than happy to do. We want to do that for Space Force, for the French. We want to do it for any allied nations, any companies that are out there that require that kind of fuel or that service. We want to make money from having a viable business model. But also we have values, and especially these days, company values matter. And in a field like space security, I think it's very important to wear your values on your sleeve and say, this is what we're about, and this is what we're not.
Absolutely. So even for people within the space industry, space law is kind of this mystery. A lot of people don't really know where it's at. Can you give us an idea of kind of where space law is? Is it mainly building out for the future? Are you trying to establish those foundations, or is there quite a bit established already? Give us kind of an understanding of where the zeitgeist is with space law at the moment.
Sure. So space law works on 2 levels. There's the international level and the national level. The international level is still very much stuck in the 1960s, 70s, in that we had these UN treaties that were adopted by very insightful and smart individuals, but there was no way they could have imagined the economy that we were going to be experiencing in space today. So a lot of the changes that are now being seen at the international level are very soft. There's no talk of, say, treaties, for example. Well, not much talk of treaties, but we do talk about norms and establishing standards of good behavior, so that everybody can kind of have a bottom line of norms and say, all right, this is kind of the expected level of behavior for everybody, and everybody should at least try to meet this threshold. Things like, don't leave trash in space. If you could bring it down, please do. Make it possible for others to track you, so that, if there's going to be a potential collision, we have greater awareness of where things are. Stuff like that.
And what are the mechanisms for enforcement for something like that?
Yeah,
That's what I thought. Okay, so
you
wide
just hit the
open.
nail on the
It's
head.
basically like a lot of missionizing, I'm guessing.
Right. And
It's funny because Michelle Hamlin just wrote, like, she'll always say, like, well, this is pretty much space law right here, like just a little notebook, right?
Yes.
Like there really isn't anything, to your point, Daniel. Like,
although, and
some, but
there is at least one thing that we can do. And actually, Michelle Hanlon's co-director at Ole Miss, Dr. Charles Stotler, and I wrote an article not too long ago talking about how the development of norms is actually going to make it easier to apply the liability convention in space, which is one of the UN treaties. Under the liability convention, if you do something in space that causes damage to somebody else, you have to pay for it.
yeah.
But we've never had a standard whereby we can measure that concept. So as norms, all these standards get developed. If something ever happens where we can actually say, like, hey, that was your satellite or your piece of debris that hit that other satellite, well, what's the standard of behavior? What's the standard of care by which you should be measured? Well, guess what? Now we have, tons of countries who have adopted certain norms of behavior, and we can point to them and say, here are at least this list of standards that we can imply and infer is the minimum duty of care. And so now we have a mechanism of enforcement. But again, it's never been done before. This is uncharted territory.
In a way, I think, one of the things, one of the messages that Inara and I push back on quite often is, this Earth versus space
Mhm.
conversation, where it's really just Earth and space. The moon is sort of like the next town over. And so really, I think our view is that a lot of these standards and norms that you're talking about exist in a form already for things that we've been doing here on Earth. There's no reason we couldn't, just adjust and apply to what's going to happen in space, again, because we should think about it that way, right? Like we're just crossing over,
Yeah.
to the next town over.
And we probably set our expectations a little too high with space, because for so many years there really weren't a lot of rules.
Yeah.
So today, if I talk to to a lot of the government leaders about, traffic laws in space, most of them will balk and be like, "Oh my God, no, that's not possible. We can't possibly have traffic laws in space. We've never had that before." Yes, but tell me that you feel weird getting in your car and driving down the road, and and having traffic laws is an infringement on your rights. Like, yes, but also we benefit from having laws. We can have more
Yeah.
cars on the road. We can have roads. We can have, street fixtures with certain confidence that people aren't just going to run into them. As outer space becomes increasingly accessible, especially to the global south, we're starting to see a greater desire to break through that taboo and just say, guys, and ladies, everyone, we have to have some kind of uh, order to what we're doing in space, because otherwise it's only a matter of time before one calamity kicks off another, and then the Kessler syndrome is out of control. And there have been some really smart reports, folks coming out of MIT or the University of Texas at Austin, who've done some great analysis that if we keep growing the way we're growing without addressing the traffic problem, it'll be 2040 before we 2040, and we'll already be seeing diminishing returns on the economic viability of satellites.
Absolutely. And I think the big problem there is the messaging as well. Space isn't real for too many people. And that's where we run into a lot of these issues where it's not prioritized. We don't have those demand signals because we haven't done the work to make it feel real or to connect people to that. And I often call the moon the eighth continent, just to, kind of break down that dichotomy of Earth versus
Oh, I love
space. And
that.
arguably, the moon's within our atmospheric system. And we think of it as this place really far away, but really it's just like like you said, the next town over. I think we need to make that space real for people and help them understand basic things like space weather impacts your daily life. You are living in space. And oftentimes even that small message of like, let's prioritize space weather and daily broadcasts, people balk at that, but it's like being in a canoe in the middle of the ocean and not caring what the currents are.
Yeah.
So I think we have that work where we make space real. We get people to realize, space is happening right now. We are going to be settling it. And we have this history as humans of the unconscious kind of settling of places, colonization, where we just went, hey, what would happen if we landed in this other country and tried this out? And we end up we destroy things. We destroy people, we destroy cultures, we destroy land because we didn't plan ahead. So I think what we need now is this conscious understanding of we are going into space. This is the generation. And because we need to have this figured out ahead of time so that we do the right thing. Things like traffic, for instance, having infrastructure and space sorted out, but also even the simple things like satellite debris mitigation. Putting huge chunks of metal up there and not having a plan for what happens when they come down, or even how to move them further into space and maybe collect them. I think Lunar's doing that. But how do we get that messaging out as far as the legal system goes? And I work with the public more, but on your side, how can we make space real enough for the legislators to make them prioritize it?
Yeah. You've hit the nail on the head. When I worked at the UN, when I worked at Secure World Foundation, one of the big challenges that we always had was, well, especially legislators and poor diplomats at the United Nations who have like 30 different themes and topics that they have to be following, including like nutrition and biochemical weapons and now you want me to talk about space trash? What is this? It's the same with the general public. We all have a lot more problems to worry about than what's going on, 1,500 kilometers in altitude. And yet, as you say, it does impact everyone. So the space community has done a really terrible job up to now, myself included, in conveying to the general public all the different benefits that they get from space. So I actually looked to you, and we were having a great conversation about this beforehand. How do we get the message out? What is it that the public wants to hear from us so that they feel connected to some of these programs? You know, I don't want people to think that space is just a race between
Extravagance.
Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos
Yeah,
to
like
prove
a
who's got the
billionaire
biggest
boys
rocket. Like,
club.
no.
I
Right.
think so. I think we have a dual problem. One, space is really difficult. It's if we talk about even Mount Everest, climbing Mount Everest, if we start talking about the ability to climb Mount Everest, we've already narrowed it down to a small pool of people that have the ability to even start that kind of idea. So that is already a disconnected idea for a lot of people. All these kind of big places that are hard to get to, people kind of cut themselves off from it. I'm never going to go there. Why is that important to me? That's not a priority. So I think that's the first part is we have to embed space into these other systems. And I call them the established religions of humanity. So space can go into fashion, into entertainment, into music. We look at, these kind of even booze, movies. No one ever questions them. Booze in space, that's something Chris Carberry is popularizing. And it's funny because the same crowd that will be like, oh, space, we can't. As soon as you talk about booze in space, they're like, oh, wait, what?
Right.
That's a thing,
I admit my dreams of space travel were shattered when I found out that you can't drink booze in on the space station
You
because
can
it
if you have the
ruins the
right
water.
friends.
Well,
That's
it
true.
ruins the water filtration system. It's actually
Yeah.
really banned for the filtration. I was very surprised that our Russian colleagues hadn't figured that one out. But after I heard that, it's like, nah, forget it. I can't go.
But that's,
No whiskey in space, I'm out.
but also like even like sex in space, like, right, we're human. We're going to take all this stuff with us no matter where we go. And so, the fact that there are actually conversations and people like Chris talking about this stuff, the general populace doesn't know. Again, there's that disconnect, right? But if they
Mhm.
knew that, like, oh my gosh, yeah, we're trying to solve for the fact that, of course, we want to have sex in space, whatever. But, and really, and again, if we're going to expand out into the universe, that's going to be a key component to
Yeah.
making sure that humanity survives and thrives, right? And so, but there are people, it's a small group right now, but they're having those conversations. So, to your point, like, how do we, we got to tell more people about that, but also, and I wanted to kind of get into what you're talking about specifically at the boot camp. How can people, because I think that the second part to this is that myself included 2 years ago, didn't think I'd ever be able to work in the space industry ever, because I wasn't a rocket scientist or an engineer and I didn't have clearance. Right. And so there's just no possible way, but that's not true. And so what is some of the work that you're doing, or how does that relate to what you're doing at the boot camp in terms of how do we let more people know that actually there's a lot of opportunity for people from
Yeah.
various backgrounds?
Yeah. And that's, I think, part of the reason that they wanted me to do the resume workshop in particular is that I've worked at the United Nations level. I've been involved in international negotiations. And then I switched over to nonprofits and now the private sector. So I've seen the industry evolve over the last 15 years from, I mean, I remember my first job in space law. I had to camp out in Washington, D.C. for a year. I mean, begging every agency, every company, anyone I could find that was involved with space law to see if they would take me on, not just for space law, but more specifically for UN stuff, which is an even more limited field. And as the years have gone by, we've seen all these different companies pop up. We've seen government policies change, which are actually encouraging commercial space activities. The US government in particular, a lot of the European nations have made it a point to say, we are not going to develop certain capabilities in-house because there are companies out there who are doing it. Y'all do it. We'll figure it out a regulatory system so that we can authorize and continually supervise your activities in space in accordance with the Outer Space Treaty. But now, you need lawyers who know stuff about contracts. You need lawyers who know stuff about, corporate law. You need lawyers who understand the regulations. Some of the younger students that I talked to today who have an interest in spectrum management, I'm like, well, your financial future is set because there's
Yeah.
such a huge demand for insight into spectrum management today that it's massive. So lawyers, engineers, yes, like they are becoming a much more common part of the average institution that sends something into outer space. But as space becomes increasingly accessible, we're starting to see artists, we're starting to see different types of institutions who are not just doing scientific research, but also like humanitarian research and things to try and better understand the way humans live on Earth, as opposed to doing space for space's sake. And that's where I am hoping the general public will start to get a greater sense of ownership over human space activities.
Yeah.
When I used to say, very jokingly, we have to beat the lawyers to space, but now I think we're gonna need the space law to be our foundation, really.
Yeah.
The ACSP's boot camp. Talk to
Mhm.
me about why you were drawn to this. We all do different conferences and different gigs, and there's always a reason why we're agreeing to these. Like, what is it about this boot camp that you think is valuable and that you want to contribute to?
Oh my God. Actually, I want to contribute to the overall mission of trying to make space law jobs more accessible to, especially to some of the younger students who are coming up. Anybody who's like 24, 25, 26 out there trying to figure out how to get in this field, I see you. It's hard. It feels like beating your head against the wall, but I promise the wall gives eventually, and I definitely want to pass that on. Also, I'm doing this very selfishly because I want to attend the export control part of the boot
There you
camp.
go. Yeah.
Because it's something that I've never been
Yeah.
exposed to before. I mean,
Yeah.
I can talk to you inside out about, every major UN working group that has looked at norm standards of behavior and treaties over the last 12 years at the UN. I could recite them because I was in the room most of the time. What do I know about export control law? So even as an experienced lawyer myself, who's now making a transition to the private sector, tons to learn, tons to learn.
I love that. I love the spirit of sharing knowledge, and that's one of the first things when I spoke to the group that established ACSP. I was really drawn to was their understanding that law was very siloed. The public didn't really understand it. Organizations didn't understand it, but also within the space law circles, there was a lack of sharing resources, understanding, and this is bringing everyone together. So it's exciting to hear you talk about, this advantage you get coming there as somebody who has this amazing background and knows a lot of this already. There are pieces that you don't have that you're going to gain while you're there as a speaker.
Yeah,
well, and
absolutely.
also the coming at this from sort of the commercial startup space realm. I mean, these questions come up every day, right? Export controls, contracting. Like it's different for a startup versus a larger organization or one of the primes. That you don't think about everything that needs to go into that. And if if you have government contracts and you're working with government agencies, that's different. There's so many things that this boot camp can provide from a fundamental knowledge and understanding perspective.
Yeah. No, what's the other one that I'm really looking forward to? It's government contracting and soliciting government contracts.
Yeah.
When have I ever done this before?
Right.
So
that's how a lot of startups. Well, and that's how a lot of startups get started and survive enough to the point where they can actually raise money. Are those government contracts, right? Like that's how most of these companies have been able to survive. Last year I think we saw how the VC market was very touchy and not a lot of people were able to raise money. And I mean, that's life or death for a startup. And if we're going to do this together, right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think events like this not only are useful today for knowledge's sake. Another perhaps selfish reason that I have for attending, the networks you end up building are priceless. Priceless. Yeah. So much of my career today is based on, well, who do we know that is over there that we could contact to get insight?
Yeah.
But removing debris or jiggling somebody else's solar panel, as we continue to refer to it, that's really new stuff. And so in order to get a sense of even a basic plan for your business to do something like this, you got to have some insight into where the rules are going, what the fees are going to be, what the insurance liability could be. And you got to know all these different experts who you can bring into into your orbit and try to piece together a solid business model.
For
So
sure.
it's been fun. Can't
Well,
wait to make some new friends.
And I think you make a really good point there. Right now it's civilization building time, really. When I think about this idea of a space industry, we really don't have a space industry. People talk about it, but we have a terrestrial industry that's focused on space. And really, to have a space industry, we're going to need a lot. We're going to need infrastructure in space.
Yeah.
And so with the terrestrial market, you can slit your opponent's throat and you can prosper. It works, but not in space, because as we don't, or your food, or so there's a different tack that has to be taken when you're civilization building from the very basics. And I think I look back at like light bulbs, for instance. There were like 6 or 7 major light bulb manufacturers when it first got started, and they had to sit down together. They had to come together in a consortium and say, how can we keep prices at a certain level? How can we keep grade at a certain level so that we don't end our own industry? And they were able to cooperate and create these agreements between them. And I think we're in the same sort of situation now with space, where these different groupings within space, like space law, for instance, you have to act in good faith with the company that you're with, but you also have to have sort of a broad cooperative model with your peers, because you're really building what's there. You're not using it.
Yeah.
You're building that future, and it's not established yet.
Yeah, we like to say at Rogue that at the moment we can't have competitors because there's no market to compete in. We have
100%.
colleagues in trying to develop a market. That's what we're all trying to do. So Astroscale, ClearSpace, D-Orbit, Rogue, even True Anomaly, and some of these other companies.
Yeah.
Nobody's buying our stuff yet. Nobody is out there like, shelling out the dollars for us to be able to compete in a market. So until then, we're all working together to create a new space economy, and that's been a lot of fun. I love the congeniality of this community.
That's the
It's kind
first
of
thing
like
I
footballers
noticed.
before the game. They all, you
Yeah.
can have a beer together and you can hang out and you can talk, but then as soon as you get to the field, then you can be competitors. I think we're all waiting to get to that
Right.
field still. So
Yeah.
it's still,
We're still
pre-game.
we're building the pitch.
Yeah.
But what's great, I mean, but add to that, like, what's great is going to these events like the boot camp. Everybody's there for the same reason, right? Space. And that's something I've never experienced in my life, right? You can go to a tech conference, you want to talk about competition, right? Like, you're vying for everybody's attention there. But at the space conferences, it really is about that collaboration. And so that's why I'm excited about the boot camp. Daniel, can't wait to meet you in person. Can't wait to see you at the boot camp and attend your session. Any last, like, to get people to come? Any last comments on why they should come see you?
You know what? Another great part of the event is I'm gonna be leading a networking tutorial, networking workshop, hopefully at the bar. So come and have a drink. Also, quick plug for the Space Court Foundation, who's the organization that helped me get to this event and made the connections. If you're a young aspiring lawyer, please check out the Space Court Foundation. They've got tons of resources also for education and familiarizing yourself with the international and national aspects of space law. Really excited about doing this boot camp. Can't wait to meet folks and teach a class over a beer.
And where can we find the Space Court Foundation? Is that spacecourtfoundation.org?
Spacecourtfoundation.org.
Okay, so we're going to pitch 2 right now. Go to spacecourtfoundation.org, also acsp.space. Check them both out. And as we promote this, we'll actually drop both of those in the promos online. And then is there a place where people can connect with you across socials? What's the best place to interact?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Porras, or if somebody really wants to shoot me an email and ask questions about space law, it's daniel.porras@rogue.space.
Fantastic. It's been such a pleasure having you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Daniel.
sure thing.
All right. Peace out, spacers.